Ever found yourself wondering whether you should use tú or usted in Mexico?
It can be tricky. Generally, usted is used to show respect, but when do we Mexicans use it?
We're gonna dive deep into this topic in this video, so you'll be an expert by the end of it. Hola amigos, we're Jim and Mai from Spanish and Go, your resource for learning real-world travel Spanish. So, how does this work, Mai? There is an informal and a formal way of speaking in Spanish, right?
Yes, so we can go for the tú form, which is the informal form of you when you want to address your friends, your family members, some of them, people you work with. And then we have the usted form, which, like I said at the beginning of the video, generally is what you would want to use when talking to people, like I said, family members, but maybe your grandmother, your grandfather, or aunts and uncles who are much older than you, then you would want to use usted simply to show respect. Also, for your boss or for the doctor, a police officer, all of the people who have like a higher social status or like a higher position in the company you work in.
So essentially, these two words, tú and usted, both mean you, but one is informal with the tú, and the other is the formal way of saying tú. So there's a little bit more to it than that because there's some verb conjugations that go along with when you want to speak formally versus informally, but we'll get into that in just a moment. So in English, we have formal ways of speaking and informal ways of speaking. It's the exact same in Spanish. There are just a few rules that are different that you need to follow. So, for example, in English, we might say something like, "Excuse me, sir, could you please direct me to the bathroom?" versus, "Excuse me, where's the bathroom?"
So in Spanish, that would be, disculpe, señor, ¿podría indicarme dónde está el baño? And the other phrase, the more informal way of saying the same thing would be, disculpa, ¿dónde está el baño?
So notice there are a few words we omitted in the less formal version, just like we would in English, right? Sometimes we'll cut the sentence down a little bit more to be less formal. But the key here is disculpa versus disculpe, right? Disculpa is the informal way of saying excuse me, and disculpe is the formal way.
And it has to do with the conjugation here of disculpar, which is the verb, right? So it depends on the subject you are using. So I can say disculpa, and I know immediately that I am referring to tú, informal. But if someone says disculpe with an E at the end, then immediately you know that they're using the usted form of you in Spanish.
That's right. So while these differences may seem small and insignificant, they can mean the difference between sounding harsh and impolite versus friendly and casual, right?
So something people always ask when learning Spanish and when they want to travel and they are trying to figure out which words to use where and which ones maybe not to use in another place, they're always asking like, but how do I know when and where to use usted or tú? And in Mexico, like I'm from Mexico, and Jim and I have spent most of our time together here in Mexico. Like I said at the beginning of the video, usted is generally used to show respect, but I feel like us Mexicans are still very respectful. We use usted a lot. Like even if I am meeting with friends and then I get to meet their parents, I always address them with usted. I do have some friends who they are my age, and then we get together when they meet my mom or my dad, and they talk to them using the tú form. And I guess it depends on the person. Some people are more casual that way, but generally, I think Mexicans are more respectful towards people who are older than us. So, yes, my grandparents, I always address them with the usted form. Also, my older relatives, like I said before, aunts and uncles. My doctor, right now, one of my doctors is kind of like my age, maybe even younger, I don't know. But I always use the formal usted because I don't know, I think that just feels more natural for me.
Yeah, it's more of a professional setting and it shows a deeper level of respect because you have a medical relationship with the other person, right? With your doctor.
Same thing with, I don't know, like a police officer. If I want to ask for directions when we're outside, I would always address a police officer or someone who works for the government or in a situation like that with usted also. If I go to the pharmacy and the person who is behind the counter looks older than me, then I'm always going to use usted also. If I go to a restaurant and the waitress or waiter is older than me, I'm going to use usted as well.
And being in a restaurant is one of those situations you'll find yourself in often when you're traveling in a Spanish speaking country, right? So, in my experience, if the waiter is about my age or younger, sometimes I'll use the informal tú, and that's fine as well.
Yeah, that goes for like friends, your family members who are kind of like your age, your cousins or your siblings, your friends, relatives that are also kind of like in your age, then yes, you can use two without any problem in that situation. I do it like that too.
So, you mentioned talking to your doctor or to a police officer. What are a couple of examples that we could use in those situations to speak to them formally?
Yeah, so I don't know, whenever you get to the appointment and you want to greet your doctor, I would say, ¿Qué tal? Buenos días, ¿cómo está? You know, está conjugated there with the usted, the formal you, instead of saying, ¿Qué onda? ¿Qué onda? ¿Cómo estás? Which is maybe what I would use to greet my sister or my cousins.
That's very informal.
Very.
Yep. So, ¿cómo está or cómo está usted? The extra usted after conjugating cómo está isn't always necessary, but it can be used to provide emphasis to really show that you're talking to that person specifically.
Yeah, like in a group of people, but generally, when you have the verb there and it's already conjugated, because we have different conjugations for each subject we're using, you don't really need to add the subject again because, like I said, the conjugation already tells you that you are using whether the usted formal or the tú, which is informal.
That's right. And one thing we like to share with our students is that it's better to err on the side of usted if you're unsure. So it often happens that when you're speaking to somebody in Spanish, you're thinking a lot, right? You're having to process a lot of information. You're trying to remember vocabulary. You're trying to remember conjugations. And if you are unsure in that situation whether you should use usted, at least in Mexico, it's better to err on the side of being extra polite and go ahead and use usted in those situations. Default to usted whenever you are uncertain about what you should use in the situation.
Yes, and sometimes the people you are referring to as usted might tell you something that indicates that they're comfortable with you addressing them with the tú form, with the informal you. So they might say, tuteame. What does that mean?
It means speak to me informally.
Hmm. Or they could say, puedes tutearme.
Can you speak to me informally?
Well, it's a command.
Oh,
Puedes tutearme.
okay.
Or like a fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Depends on the intonation, right?
Yeah.
So, tuteame is the command, or ¿me puedes tutear, por favor? Right? Like that would be, would you please speak to me informally?
Mm-hmm.
And notice in there you have tu, right? Tutear. It's the verb of tu. So, to speak to someone informally would be to tutear.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting word. It's not very common, it's not very frequently used, but when someone says this to you, it means that they're comfortable with you using the tú. to address them.
And another phrase you might hear when someone is asking you to speak to them informally is háblame de tú. This phrase is also very common, but it got me in trouble once because I wanted to use this with somebody else in Nicaragua. It was a housekeeper's friend, and they were speaking to me formally, which felt really strange to me. I want to feel like I'm just talking with friends, right? And so they don't need to speak to me with extra respect or anything like that. So I just said, háblame de ti, which is incorrect. And
Yeah.
there's a big difference in translation between these two phrases.
Yes, so háblame de ti means talk to me about yourself. But if you say háblame de tú, that's the one it means talk to me using tú, or talk to me informally. And there is just one letter difference, but
It makes a big difference.
yeah.
I was so embarrassed. But this is one of those situations where when you're practicing your Spanish, when you find yourself in those situations where you are embarrassed, you can use them as learning experiences, as learning opportunities. And that way you'll never forget how to say it the right way next time.
Mm-hmm.
I know I won't forget.
Yeah, and I think there's a very popular song that says this phrase, háblame de ti, and I think that's what got you confused.
I think you're right. Yeah. It's a very famous song. I've heard it many times before, and I think it just came out that way because I've heard this song so many times. I've heard that phrase, háblame de ti, more often than I've heard háblame de tú.
Yeah, and that shows that music can be a good way of learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the focus of this video is how tú and usted are used in Mexico, but keep in mind the Spanish-speaking world is massive. There are 21 countries that speak Spanish, if you count Puerto Rico, and they all have their own societal rules around how and when to use tú or usted, or how to speak to someone informally versus formally. So, for example, recently we were in Colombia, and there we learned that almost everybody speaks formally with usted to their friends and family and to doctors and policemen. It seemed to be the default for pretty much any situation.
Yeah, we think it's very funny how sometimes they would be arguing, like somebody wanted to park, but the other person wouldn't let them, and they would be arguing using the usted form. And I think it's cute. It's just so different to how we do it in Mexico.
Yeah, to call each other names, but maintain that level of formality and respect just is a funny combination. It sounded hilarious to me as well. But just keep that in mind. It depends on where you're traveling to, right? So if you want to travel to somewhere that's not Mexico, we recommend that you find a tutor online from the country that you're going to visit and ask them, how is informal versus formal speech used in your country?
And a couple of the platforms that we recommend for this are Baselang or italki, where you can find teachers from pretty much all over the world. And if you use our special link or code, I believe you can get a little bit of a discount. And we also get a commission at no added cost to you.
And it's a small way you can support this channel if you enjoy this content. And if you want to practice tú versus usted in real world situations in Mexico, well, you could certainly join us on a Spanish Immersion Retreat in Mexico.
Yes, our Spanish immersion retreats are very fun. And these are also great opportunities for you to get to know other like minded people who are in the same journey of learning Spanish. And you get to connect also with locals. You get to have conversations with people from Mexico in real life settings, like Jim was saying. And it's really a fun way of learning the language, but also practicing what you already know.
We've already hosted over 250 students from all over the world, just like you. And if you're interested in joining us on one of these experiences, head on over to SpanishAndGo.com/immersion retreats. We'll go ahead and leave a link in the description of this video as well, where you can check it out. So back to how do you use tú versus usted in Mexico. One way I like to think about this is like a graph. Now, as time goes on, you get older, right? And as you get older, you end up using usted less and less, at least when it comes to ordinary, everyday social interactions, right? Because as you become the same age as the average age of the population and older, you find yourself using usted less often. Now, if you compare that to social status, now that's something that pretty much stays the same, right? You're pretty much always going to speak to a police officer or a doctor or a government official using usted. That doesn't change no matter what your age. So I like to kind of think of it that way. As time goes on, I find myself using usted less and less, but I'm always going to use it with people who have a higher social status than I do, or like I said, government officials, police officers, doctors, and the like.
Well, there you have it. Next time you're in Mexico, you'll be prepared to navigate social situations like a local.
And perhaps avoid embarrassing yourself like I have so many times before. Just kidding. If you do, take it as a learning opportunity. So don't be afraid, practice your Spanish, practice this as much as you possibly can, and you will master it with the tips in this video.
And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.
And remember, el camino es el destino.
The journey is the destination.
Hasta la próxima.
Hasta luego.